Like, I feel like a big problem is this neocon ideology. When did this neocon foreign policy to dominate? Where did it come from? Can you first define what a
Okay,
neocon is and
right.
where did it
Uh,
originate from? Because we
yeah,
use this term all the time.
it often is used too broadly as just to mean a warmonger. You can say a
Mm,
neocon is a warmonger, but a neocon is a particular kind of warmonger. The neocons, is short for neoconservative, have their roots with ex-Trotskyites. Now, my understanding is the Trotskyites were ones that wanted to, who believed in the old Soviet Union, believed that you had to bring revolution to the world. That the world had to have a revolution, become communist before you could really achieve, the workers' paradise here on Earth. So they wanted to export the revolution. You couldn't just stop and rest on your laurels in the Soviet Union. Stalin, was not a Trotskyist. Trotsky was his enemy, and Trotsky fled. He was eventually assassinated in Mexico. He was
mm,
found dead with an ice pick lodged in his
right.
brain. But there continued to be Trotskyites. People who had this ideology, leftists who believed in exporting revolution. Some of them underwent a conversion to, I think, certainly after the death of Stalin and after it became clear that the Soviet Union was declining. And then I think because they were largely Jewish, they began to identify more and more with American power rather than Soviet power because the government began to have somewhat of an uneasy relationship, let's say, with Jews. They didn't openly persecute them, but there was some friction and tension between the government and the Soviet Union's Jewish population. That was, one of the first things that they sought was emigration for Jews from the Soviet Union. So that they switched allegiances, and so their
Wait,
old
wait.
allegiance that we're talking
Sorry.
about the Trotskyites, right?
Right, right. But you're saying the Trotskyites, they were Jewish people? I mean,
Yeah,
you're
largely,
saying that.
almost entirely, right. Well,
Really?
that
Okay.
was not unusual, just in general. Like in the 1930s, 1940s, America, communists, people on the far left tended to be Jewish. Not all of them, by a long shot. Not all. You can't say they were one and the same, but a lot of them were. And these Trotskyites were largely Jewish. So they had an allegiance to the Soviet Union, but they switched it to the United States, starting in, let's say, the late 60s. And so, but they actually, you found them in both. Uh, I think they first found him actually in the Democratic Party around Scoop Jackson. Jackson, he was a senator from the state of Washington, and he was a very strong hawk and very anti-Soviet. But they eventually migrated to the Republican Party when Reagan became president. So what they were about, I mean, it was not just that they were hawks, but they were in favor of exporting American ideology. So that's what sets them apart from, let's say, other people who are hawks. There may be sets them apart very much from an America firster who just says, okay, well, America should just pursue its own interests, and but we don't have any obligation to export our ideology. It's just that America will defend her borders. America will, stand by her allies, and that's that. Um, but the Trotskyites, or I should say now the neocons, believe that we have to do more. We need to export the revolution, so to speak. That is, we have to export the American way of life. So it means political liberalism, democracy, markets, free markets, that kind of thing. And you saw it on full display, actually, with the invasion of Iraq under George W. Bush. He had a lot of neocons in his administration. So wasn't just that, okay, that we need to overthrow this guy, or, defeat him, but that we need to impose the American way of life on this country. We need to teach him to, introduce them to all those institutions, those glorious things, democracy, free markets, and so on and so forth. Um,
And how did that work out for
and
us?
it was a total failure, right? It was a total disaster. Um, but they're still around, and they still, so when you find people who are I think you see it now, both, certainly the Russophobes in the administration in the U.S. government are typically neocons. They also, they tend to be loyal to Israel and they tend to hate Russia. So, when they talk about Russia, it's not just that, okay, you know, Russia has its interests, we have our interests, and we need to compromise, or we need to work out some sort of modus vivendi, or it's no, we have to, Russia needs to be, in a sense, converted, right? Russia, we have to bring the American way of life to Russia. Russia is not just a rival, but Russia is evil. Russia is, doesn't have, or is, uh, you know, doesn't have the institutions, or it hasn't adopted the ideology, the American ideology fully, and it needs to. And so, I think this is part of the reason why we find ourselves in such a fix. They just can't, they can't let bygones be bygones. They can't let Russians be Russians and Iranians be Iranians and Chinese be Chinese. So, constantly have to pressure these countries, because not just, again, because they're our rivals, but because they're wrong, because they have the wrong kinds of institutions, they have the wrong kinds of ideas, and they must be corrected. They must, we must export our ideology to them, and they need to accept it, and then we can't really rest until the whole world has adopted the American way, the Western way, the
Mm.
liberal way, and now
I could
increasingly as we develop the woke way.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I could see, maybe 50 years ago how that idea concept could have had some traction and move forward because America really was this, just this colossus that was with a booming economy, and we were exporting our culture, or the movies, the music. We got McDonald's and Coca-Cola and blue jeans and Star Wars. It's like everyone's like, wow, America is so cool. But it just seems so deranged to try it now when people are looking at, you gotta, we gotta export our way of life, and people look at Americans like, you guys can't even define what a woman is anymore. Your president has dementia,
Right.
and you lied to everybody out for a long time, and now he's just AFK. He's not even around anymore. He's just, you've installed Kamala, who hasn't done an interview yet in over a month and 40 days, and everyone's
Right.
like, what is this way of life, this system you have? There's a huge amount of unrest.
Right.
Everybody's at each other's throats here. It's like the idea of trying to export the American way of life at this point in time just seems delusional. I think it's been delusional for the past
Yeah.
20 years. I could see
Right.
how I never think it's a good, you shouldn't try to impose how another country or another people should live. I think it was just a wrong way of thinking back then, but I could see how it had the ability to make real headways back in the day. Today,
Uh-huh.
it's just the more we try, the more stupid we look. And but
Right. Yeah,
that's
I
where
think
we're
it's
going.
true. I mean, just, well, there used to be a stark contrast. Let's say when the neocons first emerged back in the 1970s or the late 1960s, early 90s, right? These were very different systems. And now, and it was, I think, a contrast that really did favor us. Most of the world, when they came to see both systems, ended up favoring ours and looked to the American system. Now, yeah, again, their problem was their aggressive, militarily aggressive approach to this. I think, if you got the system that works, you can be confident that you're going to win in the end. You don't need to bring the world to the edge of a nuclear war or anything like that to do it. You don't need to. It wasn't military pressure that brought about the collapse of the Soviet Union. In the end, it was like, it's certainly true in China too. It's just the Chinese looked at the mainland Chinese looked at Taiwan and they saw how economically successful they were, and they just made the decision, okay, yeah, we need to at least import certain aspects of the system. And clearly, there's certain aspects that clearly are working very well, and we need to incorporate it within our own system. And they did it, starting with Deng Xiaoping. So there was this contrast, but there was no need for us to be aggressive. And now the contrast is not what it used to be. If anything, now, much of the world is looks at Russia and China. and Iran and so on. They actually, if they go, especially if they go and visit these countries, they say, life's not bad in these places. And the people there actually, by and large, support their governments more so than Americans support their government. And so you don't really have that kind of that easy sell that you used to have. But you continue to have the aggression. In fact, the U.S. has become hyper aggressive. Even when they have, as their own country declines, when they have less and less to offer, they at the very same time they become more aggressive.
Yeah, it's just we're seeing it's just the end of the empire. We keep on talking about it. It's just this is what we're witnessing, and we're lashing out because we don't want to believe that our system is broken, that we're no longer number one, that not everybody loves America. Hardly anybody loves America anymore. Americans don't even love America anymore, and still we're trying to export our system and keep these wars going, and it's sad. When did the neocon ideology really become the dominant foreign policy for the United States? When did that really? Because that's really one of the
Yeah.
biggest problems of the United States. I think is that neocon ideology it dictates our foreign policy.
Yeah, well, I would have to say it was with George W. Bush in the Iraq War. And you heard he had a lot of neocons in his administration. His father actually knew about the neocons, but he considered them crazies. And he kind of tried to keep them in the basement. I think he actually warned his son about them. um,
God damn it,
but
Bush.
but it was under George W. Bush that's when we started to hear, if you're not with us, you're against us. And you got that open talk about bringing democracy to the Middle East. This is how they were going to solve the problem of, conflict in the Middle East. They weren't going to try to actually, push for the two-state solution, but they were going to export democracy first to Iraq and then to Syria and then, everything, and teach them, the benefits of the American system. And they were just sure they thought they would essentially just sort of ignite revolution throughout the Middle East. And then once all these countries became little Americas, then we would have peace because we would all be on the same side. You heard it was, I think it was, who was the Secretary of State at the time? Her name escapes me at the moment. The black lady from Stanford. But
Oh,
anyway,
Condoleezza Rice.
Condoleezza Rice, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think she said that it was, yeah, you had to bring democracies to countries because democracies never start wars. She said that shortly before we launched the war against Iraq, of course. So it was total nonsense. But that's the way they thought, right? So it's just that this is, we can't avoid exporting our ideology because that's really the solution. They have to become good Americans as long as they have these alien ideologies. They believe in Islam. They feel that they belong to a different civilization. They're Confucians in China or whatever. We're always going to have this clash. We got to end the clash by exporting our way to everywhere. Yeah, so
Okay,
it
well,
definitely. Yeah, I think it really came into its own under George W. Bush.
but the strange thing is that it was under a Republican president, George W. Bush, but it just continued. It seemed like after that, it just
Oh
like
yeah,
once
well
they
they
got
go.
in, they
Yeah,
stayed
they go.
in, right?
Yeah, that's right, and they go back and forth between the parties. I think now they're mostly with the Democrats, um, because again they're not comfortable with Trump because Trump's really not a neocon. See, that's the way he talks about just getting along with these different people. Like, I can talk to Putin, I can talk to Xi or whatever. And you're not supposed to talk that way. They're evil. They need to be, you have to work for regime change because they represent a different kind of civil. I think Trump really doesn't think that way. Maybe again, the kind of the one glaring exception. It's not so much a neocon thing, but he has sold his soul to the Zionists. But aside from that, he believes in actually getting along with different leaders, regardless of what their systems are. So, he does talk about just, making peace with the Russians, and the neocons don't like that kind of language. They know that he's not one of theirs.
We need to change the term neocon because I think it's just because it's neoconservative. People just associate it with the Republican Party. And this is a
Yeah,
big problem that somehow people that don't follow the news closely or what's
Yeah,
happening globally, they just assume that maybe the Democrat Party is still the peace party when it's they
yeah,
are the neocon party now. You know,
yeah.
it's
Yeah,
I mean,
the
I know that
Republicans are
sounds
definitely not the.
crazy, but
Yeah, right. The Republicans are definitely not the peace party, but
yeah,
neither are
well,
the
we don't have
Democrats.
any peace party,
Not
but
by a
we
long
have
shot,
at least
right?
one party that
Yeah.
might
No,
end
you're
one
right.
war. You
Yeah,
know.
no, it's a much misused term, and even by people who, who are much more knowledgeable, they tend to use it just to describe any kind of hawk in the U.S. I'll give you one example: is John Bolton is described as a neocon, but he's not really a neocon. He's just a warmonger. I mean, he's not
Mm,
interested in exporting any ideology. He just wants to, bomb and overthrow governments, and and just make a show of American power.
mm.